Yes.
All right, it is game day, week 0, 90 minutes away from kickoff. FIU versus Law Tech. Jake, Johnny, what's up? Big game. It's game day finally. After so long of covering this team, we finally could say FIU plays football. Jake, what's up?
Oh my goodness. One of the most endearing times that we have to go through as sports fans is the summer when there is a lack of football. So to finally be back to watch an FIU game tonight in week 0 against a very familiar opponent in Louisiana Tech, super exciting, super happy we're here to do this preview.
Yeah,
Johnny, your first year with FIU comms, how are you feeling?
I'm pumped. Week 0 doesn't get better than that. National TV, one of only 10 teams to be on here. I'm excited. A lot of expectations for this program. You know what happened last year. This year, it's making a bowl game, and I think week 0 conference game. You want to see how you're playing conference. Well, there you go. La Tech opened it up. These two teams had a thriller last year where FIU won double overtime. I think we'll see something like that this year. Hopefully, FIU gets the winning side again and starts the year 1-0 and a huge game to begin this season.
I think the right way to say it is that this game's going to be lights out.
Lights out! Lights out!
Slipped in it a little bit early this time around, Jake.
It's gonna be lights out under the lights. A 9 o'clock start from Ruston, Louisiana.
Yep. So I think we could start with the quarterback situation. Obviously, I think when you look down the road, we're gonna have some nice quarterback battles here. But this first one is one that I do want to start with. Hank Bachmeier for Louisiana Tech. He is the Boise State transfer. He's been really good. He's had his moments. He didn't only play 4 games last year. He was replaced. I'm not quite remembering the name, but the Boise starter that replaced him. But you look just a year back, I think he had over 3,000 yards. He had around 20 touchdowns. He was a really good addition, and he's someone who fits into Sonny Cumbie's offense, the air raid offense, and that's something he wanted to be a part of. Obviously, just when you kind of, research to write previews for just to know about the other team, that's the one thing you look at, just what coach says. And Johnny, just your thoughts on Bachmeier and this La Tech team that had brought in 12 transfers.
You look at it last year, they had a freshman for La Tech in that FIU game, but now you have a senior, Hank Bachmeier, who's played so many games with Boise State. That's an offensive-minded, team that he played on. He was a great quarterback, and all of a sudden it switches now to La Tech, and it's going to be a tough test. I think for FIU, you're playing a guy that has been with college football for a good amount. He's a veteran-like guy. You don't have to step up, but I think for the Panthers is the only thing you have is, yes, he's a veteran, but at the same time, this is his first year, with a new team, new coach. Do you think I'm thinking maybe that could be a factor if I could take advantage of it, but still, he's someone you got to be wary of because he's known to put up points on the board. So it'll be a really tough task, but you never know what FIU can put up their sleeve in this one.
Looking back at his 2021 season, which is the only year actually, where he's played a full 12 games, 3,000 passing yards, 252 completions, 20 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions. He had a rate of 139.8. Jake, when you look at this La Tech team, what stands out to you? Oh, Jake is frozen. All right, we're going to remove Jake. Sorry for those technical difficulties. We'll keep it with Johnny and myself. Johnny, when you keep looking at La Tech, another name that stands out is Smoke Harris. Obviously, they don't have their other Harris, who transferred over to Ole Miss. So when we were talking to Coach Mack on Tuesday, he really, he emphasized Smoke Harris a lot. He mentioned how he will get you anywhere on kickoffs and bubble passes, on any part of the offense, any moment. Just talk to us a little bit about him and what he's going to bring to this game and how big of an impact, I guess, how stressful he could be for an FIU defense.
He's going to be huge. He talked about it, on returns. He's the guy. He has the speed and on the field as well on offense. He's going to be somebody that, if when he has the ball, he'll do a lot of dynamic things. He's one of the best in the nation. And obviously conference, he was named to the special teams player of the already preseason player of the year in that category. So he's somebody that he'll be really explosive. And FIU has to find a way to stop them. They sort of did. They were able to do some things last year as well, but he's going to be really, really dynamic, and I think he'll make some big plays against FIU this game just because it's opening week. I think you'll see something happen. But down the stretch, you don't want to limit. You want to limit it to some because he can really do a lot. Really being a huge role for this Sonny Cumby offense.
Obviously, I think now something we did promise, and we have to mention is something we want to implement each week to these pregame streams is kind of share what coach or some of the players even talk about. So we're going to start with the first of like a couple of these, and we're going to start with what Coach McIntyre had to say on Hank Bachmeier and Smoke Harris.
Louisiana Tech, I mean, that offense is, they got the quarterback from Boise State. You talk about how explosive they are on that side of the ball.
Yes, he's an excellent quarterback, Hank. I remember Hank coming out of high school a while back, and he can make all the throws. And he had some phenomenal games at Boise State, and it was interesting that he had left there, and that's the way I guess the world is now with all the transfer stuff, and because he's a West Coast guy, and grew up in California playing ball and doing all that. So he's an excellent player. It can be interesting to see how. Of course, we looked at Boise State film, the way they used him there, and they know what they're doing offensively, and at Louisiana Tech, and they're very explosive. They got a lot of explosive players, a lot of explosive receivers, tight ends that can run, wide receivers that can fly. And then anytime they get the ball to Smoke, he's dangerous. So their running backs are good. They've run the ball well. So and they got their entire offensive line back. So I guess they went out and found a quarterback they felt that would fit into what they were doing, and that young man could play on a lot of football teams, and he's a very good player.
Yeah, and those are the words from FIU head coach Mike McIntyre. Jake, now we spoke a little bit about on the offensive end what La Tech could kind of provide. I think the big thing to mention very quickly before we move on to the defensive side of things for this team is the fact that they will be without starting running back Marquise Crosby. Just talk to us a little bit about what he did against FIU last season. If you remember, 115 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was a big part of the La Tech's offense there. Jake, just talk to us a little bit about that loss for them. Obviously, when we spoke to Coach, just very quickly, he did mention that it won't really change the game plan. Him and Donovan Manuel both said that, but obviously, when you're facing a different running back, it's a different run style. Obviously, same offense, just a different type of player you're seeing there.
Yeah, man, Louisiana Tech. I think for the majority of Louisiana Tech's offense in that game against FIU last year was defined by their success in the running game, especially near the red zone. Every single time Louisiana Tech scored against FIU, it was from a rush, either a 1-yard rush, 5-yard rush. I think in one instance, a 25-yard rush.
Four rushing touchdowns in that game.
4 rushing touchdowns, yeah. I am not one to think Louisiana Tech, because of that loss of that running back, will immediately adopt an air raid style of offense. I think it's just going to be next man up for the Bulldogs to see what other running backs they have in their core that they can try out throughout the duration of the game and see if they have a running back that lands. But yeah, it is a massive loss for the Bulldogs, something that hopefully FIU can take advantage on with their defensive line to just not limit the Bulldogs to any rushing yards and or, God forbid, rushing touchdowns against an otherwise unknown running group in the Bulldogs. Yeah.
Now looking quickly at the defense, I think the two names that stand out in this, and your coach really emphasized a lot, are Deshaun Hall Jr., the defensive tackle, and Hugh Davis, the linebacker. When we spoke with Coach Jake on Tuesday, he really emphasized those two names, and you just went by number 5 and 9. And Jacob Peace mentioned them as well. Grayson James mentioned them as well. Just these guys made a huge impact, not only in that game last season, the overtime, which we do have to go back to because a lot has changed from that year to today. Jake, how big are those guys going to be into trying to stop this FIU offense?
Man, FIU's offense has their work cut out for them. Louisiana Tech's defense for the past few seasons has been predominantly good, both at stopping the pass, but especially in stopping the rushing game. We saw that again last year in that game against FIU. I spoke with Coach Mike about it. I believe only 57 or 56 rushing yards allowed by the Bulldogs in that game. They have a just ginormous defensive line that just does not let anything go through them. If FIU wants to find success on offense, the offensive line is going to work as hard as they can. And it's especially crazy because a bunch of newcomers are on that offensive line. We don't have an official say on how good they're going to look or not compared to last season because we can't do that. So they're going to have to create holes for FIU's running backs because the defensive line is not going to give them an inch. And Louisiana Tech's secondary is solid. And Grayson James, while he did have a really great game against them last year, of course, nothing is certain. Louisiana Tech was one of the conference leaders last year in turnovers, whether it was fumbles or interceptions. Their defense is trouble. Might be one of the best defenses in Conference USA. So if FIU can get by that and actually put up lots of points on the scoreboard like they did last season in that overtime thriller, an absolute classic, we all saw it. We were all amazed at how it ended. Yeah. But yeah, it should be a fun one.
Yeah, just quickly with Grayson, as you mentioned, Jake, last season, he did have a lot of success against this team, especially through the air, unlike Liddy Landry last season, or Landry Liddy, I'm sorry. No, yeah. Liddy Landry, yeah. Against last season.
Landry Lily.
Okay.
Literally.
He did not throw a single touchdown. Grayson, on the other hand, 3 touchdowns, 321 yards. He was 31 for 48, did not throw a single interception. His longest pass was 34 yards and only 1 sack. I think it really just came down to like how much FIU struggled on the ground. Obviously, I mean, when you say that, it's flex with 2 touchdowns and only 41 yards. Obviously, you just have to look back at Louisiana Tech. They had a total of 194 yards on the ground. And I don't think we'll expect 194 yards on the ground for Louisiana Tech, Johnny. No. I think, with Hank Bachmeier coming from Boise State, and, it's not really shifting to the air raid offense. It's just how things played out in that last matchup where FIU didn't struggle, I believe, too much. They struggled more on the ground game than down on the air. Obviously, these guys, you had Demetrius Hill last year, CJ Christian when he was healthy. Johnny, how big is it going to be for FIU to stop someone like Hank Bachmeier?
It's going to be really crucial. You talk about it, he's really explosive with the arm. He can find ways to get deep shots. So for FIU, they're going to have to, really be able to stop when he's kind of in his groove, which could happen. And, these are 2 teams that I think match up a little bit. Obviously, they have the more experienced quarterback, but, if FIU is able to get some big stops, he talked about it, don't know Demetrius Hill, but CJ Christian is back, and he's somebody that's supposed to have a really big year. I'm excited to watch him play, and a lot of the other DBs that are expected to step up and make some big-time plays, but, you got to realize sometimes that always the first game, the first half can always be a little more of a, nervous with all the expectations, the excitement. So you don't know if La Tech will use that up their sleeve, but I think it'll be really crucial down the stretch in the game. Maybe second half, if it's a back and forth matchup, FIU be able to get some big stops with this quarterback that is going to make really big time plays, all across Saturday or tonight's ball game.
All righty. Before we move on to the FIU side of things, talk about what to expect on that end. I think we can listen to Mike McIntyre one last time, talk about this La Tech team, which, as Johnny mentioned, was one of the leaders in Conference USA last year.
And, Coach, it's a bit strange to begin the season against a conference opponent, but how impactful do you think it'll be for FIU to play against a conference opponent in the beginning of the season in preparation for the latter end?
Yeah, I think it's exciting for us. Just the fact that we're going to be able to play on national television and play a good opponent at their place. It's going to be an excellent crowd, and a lot of excitement. So it's a lot of fun. You always want to play the best you can play and keep going. So that's our kids are excited about going and doing that. And it'll be a good atmosphere in Ruston for sure.
That voice sounded a bit familiar, huh?
Yeah, that was a fire question. Shout out to whoever asked that.
The funny thing is that even went on the FIU football team.
Hey, shout out Hunter with he knew the question.
Yeah. So to sort of piggyback off of what Coach said there, again, it's pretty much the norm in all of college football that your first game, if you're a FBS school, just match up against an FCS school, get yourself a free win against a much more inexperienced.
Kind of what they expected against Bryant last year.
Right. What they expected against Bryant, what they got the past couple of years against, I believe, Long Island. And I don't remember the FCS team they played prior to Long Island before that. But and that was kind of to be expected this year as well with Maine and how it was set up. And then we got the announcement later on that, FIU would actually be beginning their season against Louisiana Tech. I think this is a great move for FIU. The players are going to get the experience against a high-quality opponent that they're going to need for the latter end of the season when they take on conference opponents. And by the way, after that Maine game, who are they playing? They're playing North Texas, who was a Conference USA opponent last year. Now they're in the, I believe, the AAC, and it's gonna feel it's not a conference game, but it's gonna feel like one.
It's not only just a conference game, but it's not a conference game, obviously, but it's a home game. So
it's a home game, yeah.
The advantage this time around, and I believe they'll still face them a couple more times, throughout the next couple of years.
Yeah, like a home and home series. But I do think this is a good move. They could do the easy thing. They could be like Miami and play Bethune-Cookman and beat them by like 60 or 70 points. And just get a nice win to put smiles on faces. But no, Mike McIntyre and FIU football's idea with this game against Louisiana Tech, FIU's going to have to work their ass off to get a win, just like how they did last year, and that it's going to create momentum and it's going to set the tone for the remainder of the season way better than they would if they matched up against Maine.
Yeah, and that's what happens sometimes. With the new media deal, FIU's getting a lot more exposure, 6 national TV games, and what do you know? They get slotted for the week 0 game, which is really cool for them. They were kind of expecting to have that week 1 against Maine, but you see week 0, and I think it creates even a bigger opportunity because you look at where this team is going, and you look at the schedule. This is a huge game because let's say they win this one, you have a chance to go. You can go. You're going 2-0 essentially if you start the season out. If you win against Saturday, that's really crucial to get on the right foot for the Panthers.
Nothing is set in stone when FIU plays FCS teams.
It's very okay. I'll say not it's guaranteed. I'm saying it's very easily they'll be 2-0 in the first 2 weeks of their season. So that's really cool for the program. It's huge because you got to start it off right, and that's going to be down the stretch. We look at all the teams you have to play that are really going to be good in this conference.
The only thing I will say is that these two teams match up fairly well, is what I will say. Obviously, it sucks on the La Tech side that they won't have their starting running back. Obviously, you would think that FIU defense would want some revenge after what happened last season, but kind of a fair running game. Both of your starters are out on that end.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks, you have one that hasn't experienced Conference USA level yet, but obviously you have Grayson, who's a little more experienced at this level, had some success in 2022. So I really do like how these two teams match up. Both teams coming off of big losses on both ends in terms of, guys just entering the transfer portal, graduation, etc. So I think that's what I want to get into. Let's look at last year's matchup and see what's changed. And I think for the FIU side, I think we just talk about who's not at receiver this year for them and who's not at tight end. We got to talk about the 3 losses that they had at receiver, running back, and tight end. Flex Joseph is now out for this season with an ACL injury. That's not, it sucks. One of my first articles on Athlon was about Flex and how he's been helping that team. When you talk to every single offensive player, the name that they will mention is Flex Joseph and how he's been able to help this team despite being out for the year. Now, thankfully, he has another year next year now, since he won't be playing, which is a good thing. And, I guess in terms of looking hindsight 2020, but let's talk about the 2 guys that they lost, Rivaldo Fairweather and Tyrese Chambers. 2 studs. It really does suck that they didn't use Rivaldo more. I believe it was this exact game where he kind of broke out. He had 89 yards, 6 receptions. He looked great for the most part.
The 5 of those receptions all came in like the fourth quarter overtime.
The fourth quarter too, yeah.
When it mattered the most,
Yeah.
He didn't score a touchdown, but he really moved that FIU offense. He moved the chains a lot. So Jake, just talk to us a little bit about Rivaldo and what FIU is losing, and then we'll talk about what they gained because I do like the current tight end situation.
Yeah, I mean, what can we not say about the how players like Rivaldo absolutely carried this team on their back in the passing game against opponents that had particularly good passing offenses, and to see a player like that gone, I wouldn't say a guarantee for every play that you could get the ball into his hands, but he, like you said, he was a playmaker, and he was a player that you could depend on in big moments, as you mentioned. Fourth quarter and overtime, he did most of his magic. I mean, what more can you ask from a tight end, right? But it's going to be tough, and I know we're going to talk about the new players in a sec, but it's going to be tough for FIU to come out of the gate swinging with a brand new tight end or running back that they feel confident in, because funny enough, they're in the exact same situation as Louisiana Tech. They need to find the brand new weapons that they felt confident with last year that are gone all of a sudden. So they're going to put up some unique plays, some unique players onto the field to see what fits. It might take a quarter or two. It might take all the way to the third or the fourth quarter for them to finally find the running back or the wide receiver that works for them best against the opposing team's defense. But it's just funny. That's the same storyline for both teams. These two teams share so much similar storylines that if you had to describe them, you could describe them both as young teams with some returning veterans, but mostly brand new, a brand new looking roster who both had relatively disappointing seasons last year. That they both know that they can absolutely win the Conference USA tournament championship if it works out for them. So lots of aspirations, and definitely going to see a lot of unique plays in this first game.
Now let's talk about what who the starting tight end will be for FIU. I guess it'll be more of a combo between Josiah Meeman and Jackson McDonald. Wink, wink about Jackson McDonald. When you look at Meeman, he really fits that tight end build. He's a tall guy, very strong. We saw him kind of break out in that last game against Middle Tennessee. Johnny, we were there. We saw that last game. He looked great in the offense. It kind of looked like towards the end of the season, offensive coordinator and quarterback coach David Yost kind of started implementing the tight ends a lot more into his offense. That's why we kind of saw Rivaldo kind of break out a little bit. We saw Josiah Meeman break out a little bit. Now with the departure of Rivaldo, we have Josiah and Jackson McDonald taking over that tight end role. Jackson McDonald mainly more of a long snapper, I believe, for FIU last year. So just talk to us about Josiah Meeman and what he brings to the table.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that came from Iowa and, was part of a stacked tight end group. And we talk about Rivaldo and Josiah. They had a great game. The Middle Tennessee game, you added guys.
It was a 2 tight end system, yeah.
Two tight end, and it worked. And obviously it was really the La Tech team in the Middle Tennessee game, which was, really stood out because, they were able to really get the ball moving. But I think Josiah's going to be really crucial. He's already was nominated to the John Mackey Award watch list, which is given out to the nation's best top tight ends. So he's already on that list. You can see the size. He's a big guy, and we see him a lot in fall camp, even in spring game. He's a very vocal guy. He really, we talked to him. He really likes to be able to be a motivator, and he finds different ways to get guys get going because that's what he wants to do. He wants to carry energy for this team, and I think he's a good leader for this group and for the tight end room. And yeah, I think it'll be really important because we saw how successful the tight ends were used towards the end of the year. I can fully expect they'll try to roll that out a little bit more. And, you talk about it, Jackson McDonald, who I fully believe he's now in his 5th year, but I think he'll get opportunities to really get some snaps, get some passes in which he deserves. He's been a grinder all over the course of his college career. And you bring in some more, tight ends, Chris Pedersen, who I think has a chance to make some moves as well, transfer from Louisville. And even
Beer brothers.
Yeah, even the Beer brothers, Rowdy and Rocky, you never know with those two. So it should be fun watching those. But really, on the top of it, Josiah will be really crucial for this tight end group. It's in tonight's game, but also overall in this season.
And you also have a new tight end coach, Zach Roper. So
yep.
Tight end and special teams. Very quickly with Josiah, he was not only mentioned, as one of the nation's top tight ends, he was also put in a lot of preseason teams. Obviously, at Athlon Sports, we put him on the second team. Well, before joining Athlon, they put him on the second team.
Shout out Athlon.
Shout out Athlon Sports. They put him, I believe, on Phil Steele's list, a highly regarded guy in this, in this industry. So, Josiah's the guy who a lot of people are very high on for this season, and I think all three of us are pretty high on what someone like Josiah could do, someone like Zach Roper could do. And as Johnny mentioned, I mean, this is a very vocal leader. There are times in that practice where the only voice you are hearing is Josiah Meeman. He's someone who's going to talk, and really no filter needed there. So,
yeah.
Jake, let's talk a little bit about Tyrese Chambers. What they lost there, a guy who I'm very surprised stayed for the Coach Mack season 1 era. I think a lot of us were. But when you look at it, since the day of the press conference, I believe he left right after to go talk to Tyrese and his family. He stayed. He was injured for a good chunk of the season. Really, and we spoke about it. He didn't put up those highlight numbers, highlight reel type plays that we saw the year prior with Tyrese. They lose him, but still, when you look at the wide receiver core, which we'll get into soon, still pretty strong.
Yeah, so Tyrese Chambers was definitely that one player that opposing defenses had to remember, had to keep their eye on, had to double team at times, which would conveniently set up more open receivers or tight ends for FIU in that same play. And to see a player like that gone, again, it's just like Fairweather. One of your almost guaranteed weapons on offense that could make plays in the clutch is all of a sudden out of the blue. And now it's going to be up to Grayson James to test the waters with his entire wide receiver core to see who just has the best, I want to say the best luck, but just the best chances against Louisiana Tech's secondary. Johnny, I believe you and I were there when Mike McIntyre called up Tyrese Chambers to stay that one more year. We were there at the the after party following the press conference when that happened. So,
Yeah.
Tyrese meant a lot to this offense, and at times I did feel like they absolutely underutilized him last season. And of course, he has himself a brand new home
Maryland,
up north, over at Maryland. Of course, we wish him the best of luck, but yeah, think of it this way: we never used. I feel like we didn't use Tyrese Chambers in the same way that the Miami Dolphins used Tyreek Hill. They didn't use him the same way where he was absolutely wide receiver one. He was their scary man on offense that would, if he wasn't catching passes, he was opening up plays for other receivers because he was the one getting double teamed.
Despite Chambers being out for most of the year, he was still at the top of almost all stat leaders. I mean, 544 yards, 4 touchdowns, and played 10 games. So he missed 2 games, actually. He didn't miss a good chunk of the season. But Johnny, let's talk about what they're adding. Well, not what they're adding, but what's back on this team and what they are adding, because they did make some pretty nice additions at the wide receiver position. And let's talk about the returners. Obviously, we have Dean Patterson, your boy, Mr. Vice.
Mr. Vice.
Mr. Vice. We have Chris Mitchell, who's kind of taking up that wide receiver one role. We still have Jalen Bracey there, and Ross Fournette, who's been making a name for himself at training camps. And then we have the newcomers. We have Luby Maurice Jr., Jacoby Matthews. We have Eric Rivers, who's been the talk of the town for FIU. Let's talk about the newcomers first. We have Eric Rivers, Luby Maurice, who's kind of been another talk of the town too. I mean, a guy who's going to get you those 50-50 passes. And then Jacoby Matthews, who's a transfer. Talk to us about those newcomers and anyone else you want to add to those newcomers. I may have missed the name.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, but, talk about Luby and Kyle McNeil. Those are the freshmen really that have kind of, turned some corners from what we've seen. I think it was Luby Maurice. He made a catch in fall camp that Kevin and I saw. He snapped it. It was like a 50-50 ball. He turned it into an 80-20. That's what Coach talks about. He's going to make some catches there. And I think, you talk always about the Jalen Braces of the world, the Dean Pattersons, but, you never know if, one of those guys comes in a snap and makes a big catch. That's what you'll kind of expect from those guys. Talk about Eric Rivers, who just keeps on, just showing out in camp. He's been somebody that everyone really loves his work ethic, and that will be, carried across into the games. And then I'll talk about the returners, whether, Dean Patterson, Jalen Bracey, Chris Mitchell, in particular, Chris Mitchell, who's a guy in his 5th year, had a more of a coming out season last year and, really shined. And I think now with the departure of Tyrese, I think you'll see Chris be the number 1 guy, and I think he'll make some big catches with the speed. Talk about Mr. Vice, Dean Patterson, who also had a great season last year. His final game of 2022 had over 100 yards from the receiving end, so he was really good.
You made the guy who was passing, those footballs to him cry.
Yeah, that we won't talk about that one, but it was a good cry. It was a good emotion. But I think Dean, somebody, I think he's gonna, he's in a slot, or maybe he can be down the stretch. Somebody that'll get some passes in the end zone. Even Jalen Bracey, with his speed, he can run around and, break some tackles here and there. And he's another fun guy to watch that came out of the JUCO ranks.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about, Eric Rivers. Let's talk about him a little bit. Obviously, he's someone who's made a name for himself this camp. He's someone who's been playing with the first team a lot, taking the reps just from what we've seen. Memphis transfer, really cool story. And I think we could get into that very, very quickly. He was a wide receiver coming out of high school. He joins Memphis. He's a defensive back. He is with Coach McIntyre throughout his time in Memphis. Mac obviously goes to FIU just a year later. Eric Rivers goes to FIU. He joins Coach Mac this year, and he goes back to wide receiver. But during his time in Memphis, McIntyre always said that he wanted him at wide receiver. So let's, just that change for him. Obviously, adjusting again to that wide receiver role, but he's looked great. And Johnny, we've seen it. He's been a great red zone target for FIU.
He has. I mean, look at him. He can get up and make some catches. He's more, from the height side, he's a little bit smaller, but he comes at you. He can really flash and come at you and make those catches. But you talk about it, a really cool story for somebody that, was a DB in college, and then Coach Mac, hey, you're a good wide receiver, and he comes over to FIU. He's a receiver, and he's been the talk ever since spring camp of what he's been able to do production wise, and he kind of reminds me a little more of a Ross Fournette as well, somebody that just grinds out his practices, and I think he's going to deserve it, based on the snaps he'll get this year and make some big catches that out of the blue. We talk about the type or the Chris's and the Deans of the world, but he's somebody, he'll come in maybe in a 3rd and 6, make a catch to get a first down. He's somebody that I think will kind of sneak up and make some big time 3rd down conversion catches.
Now, Jake, I do want to ask. Obviously, you've obviously been around this team for a long time. Obviously, 2020 dating back.
Yeah.
You've been for the really, really bad years, and obviously you've seen different quarterbacks, different receivers. But you were never around for, before Tyrese. You never saw a clear wide receiver one, is what you've been saying for past years, and that's what I do want to get to, because we talk about Chris Mitchell being the wide receiver one, and I think we could all agree, consensusly, that he is probably going to be the wide receiver one on this team. But throughout camp, it doesn't really it doesn't seem like that's always been the case. There's been times where Grayson has really been spreading the ball to every guy on that offense, obviously Josiah, Jackson, McDonald's, etc. Jake, do you think it could kind of be that same situation that you've seen in past years, where there's not a clear wide receiver one, but you have really good receivers on your squad, like you've probably seen in the past?
That just comes down to natural talent with these receivers. And if they're all good enough to secure at least a handful of catches per game, then yeah, they can absolutely run an offense where you don't need an absolute star receiver to go out and grab 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in one night and call a day. If you can get multiple wide receivers that can all secure at least a touchdown, at least 50, 60 yards, and just chew time off the clock and just get drives that start from the 20-yard line all the way down to Louisiana Tech territory. If they can do that, and of course on top of that you have your tight ends and running backs to mix in here and there, they can do that, then I don't see the problem with it. It's something that a lot of teams in Conference USA have done that have worked well. Of course, you saw with teams like UTSA and FAU have historically not had a giant marquee wide receiver. They just threw the ball to anybody who would catch it. And for teams like UTSA, yeah, it worked out real fine for them. Teams like North Texas, yeah,
they had Frank Harris. They had Frank Harris.
Yeah, they did. But again, those teams were able to get at least 4 or 5 wide receivers in the game, catching at least 1 or 2 passes at the least, and at most each catching 3 or 4. If FIU can run an offense like that and it works, then by all means, let them do it. Let them do it if it can.
All right, I think we've spoken a little bit about the wide receiver situation. Obviously, the last thing that's not very the last thing that's different going back is obviously the running back situation. We mentioned it. Unfortunately, Flex is out for the year, but they brought in I believe Dakota transfer, North Dakota, South Dakota transfer, Shamari Lawrence. He's probably going to be taking the bulk of the reps, but obviously you still have Antonio Patterson, TJ Snowden, Keyshawn Owens, Johnny. Let's talk about that running back core. For the most part, they've had their ups and downs throughout camp. There was a time where a couple guys were injured. We can't talk too much about those, but we'll mention that. What have you seen from Shamari throughout camp? Obviously, Antonio Patterson also taking a lot of reps, so expect to see him out there. And you're muted, by the way. You're muted.
There we go. No, I'm perfect. Thank you for reminding me. We have a Shamari Lawrence. I think Coach talked about it in his press conference. He talked about it. He discussed everyone's really good, and he'll find ways to use a lot of them. There's no true defined starter.
It's going to be more running back by committee.
Yes, yeah. That's how it is usually. You know about Flex. He's the starter, but we had EJ Wilson last year who left the Temple. They mixed it up a little bit, but I think Shamari is somebody that he'll come in and get a lot of the snaps. He's 6'2", a big guy. A big back, and he's more of, he'll work his way in. I think Coach Yost talked about it in spring, of his ability to kind of work through, the inside part of the line and get through and kind of eat yards and kind of push his way in for some carries. So he'll be fun to watch. And then Antonio Patterson, who was one of the first recruits committed to FIU under Coach McIntyre. He redshirted last year, obviously a very deep running back room, and so didn't really get as much playing time. He didn't get, whether it was North Texas or UTEP games, whether it's out of reach, you would get some carries, and he shined a little bit. He had some good moments, and then Keyshawn Owens, who showed out or had a touchdown in the UTSA game that was at the end. But so he's another one that I'm excited to watch. I think it's you said a running back high committee that Coach emphasized, and a lot of people can do a lot of stuff. It's tough to lose Flex, but with that, some guys have to step up, and that's what makes it fun about a running back room. That Every year for FIU, it always has dudes, and I think this year they have that with the guys they brought in.
All right, before we head into the defensive side of the ball for FIU, I want to kind of go through some facts about La Tech and their team by the numbers. Obviously, when you look at the game notes, there's some very impressive stats, I will say, that kind of, make you a little bit nervous. Let's start with I'll go by number because that's how it kind of gets presented in these game notes. And we'll start with the number 32. So wide receiver Smoke Harris has recorded a reception in 32 straight games, which is the 7th longest streak nationally. So that just shows you they had a wide receiver 1 last year, but then you had Smoke Harris, who was a wide receiver 2, steps into that wide receiver 1. I mean, I guess you had 2 wide receiver 1s last year for La Tech. Now,
Pretty much.
Let's move on to the next number, and this is the one that I think should kind of put a little more nerves, Number 44. Louisiana Tech has been dominant at home in home openers since Joe Elliott Stadium opened in 1968, holding a 44-9-1 record at home on home openers. So
that's cool, but I don't know how big an impact that actually
is. It shows the success at home games.
Do you know when their last open? Did they win their last home opener last year?
Who was it?
I'm asking you. I don't know that either.
I don't know either. Jake,
but here's the thing.
Check their home opener last year. But I mean, is it just because it's hot and humid in Ruston, and maybe opposing teams don't know what to do? Because I feel like FIU wouldn't know what to do with hot and humid temperatures.
I'm gonna say that too. You saw that about the heat this summer. The guys though they were battling out all summer long.
Yeah, if there's one thing that you kind of feel pretty good about is FIU being able to play in any condition.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that sucks is going to be down the line in the season, and we'll get into that, but they're going to some cold places, man. Like, we're talking 20, 25-degree weather.
I was saying this. Is it actually going to be that cold in Arkansas? I don't think it is. In late November, it's not.
In the middle of, like, October? Yeah.
No, November. It's November.
November, yes.
No,
John.
I said it's going to be 50s, 40s, 50s, not 20. We're not doing
20s, 25s, Johnny.
No, it's 50. I'm going 50s, but that's
So,
we'll be there. We'll be there. We'll be there
yeah.
for Arkansas.
Yeah.
We'll define it. But
We'll see it. Louisiana Tech's home opener last year was against Stephen F. Austin, in which they won by a score of 52-17.
That just shows you.
Another thing, though, this is not. I would assume most of their home openers could have been mainly the FCS games. They're Power 5, but
that's what FIU's was going to be against Maine.
yeah.
It's still a stat, though, guys. So it
is true. Stats are stats.
To round up before we go into the current look of La Tech, I do think it is a good idea to give some perspective on what happened to them last year. And what happened to last year? They had a worse record than FIU. A 3-9 record in total, 2-6 in the conference, 3-2 at home, and 0-7 on the road. They got blown out by Missouri to begin the season. They then got blown out. They beat Stephen F. Austin. They dropped 2 straight games to Clemson. I mean, that's a little bit unfair. And then South Alabama. They beat UTEP, fell to North Texas, lost in overtime to Rice, lost again in double overtime to FIU. Beat Middle Tennessee, got blown out by UTSA, and then that was part of a 3-game losing streak to end the season. Also with Charlotte and UAB, they obviously did not go to a bowl game.
Okay, so I have one last stat So let's talk about this quickly. Last year was the first time ever FIU has beat La Tech. A La Tech win would make it would improve their record against FIU to 5-1. But the last stat I want to mention is it's the number 2, and that's another Smoke Harris stat. Smoke Harris is one of just 2 players returning nationally that accumulated 500 plus kickoff return yards and 200 plus punt return yards in 2022. This man will not only make you scared on the offensive end, but even the first kickoff, if FIU is kicking it off to La Tech on minute 0-0 in the first quarter, that man's going to be there to return that kickoff, and you're going to be scared. So I guess any thoughts on that stat before we move on to the FIU defense, which saw a huge turnover?
It's so often to see FIU either punt or kickoff, especially because, unfortunately, FIU's offense was so inconsistent last year that they would often be kicking the ball off from their side of the field, the 20 to the 30-yard line. So enemy teams would be getting great field position to open up drives. To have a weapon like that, not just open up drives, but maybe finish them as soon as he gets the ball on these kickoffs and punts. scary. It's scary, and I'm just as interested as all of you to see what FIU special teams is going to look like. Definitely not a topic that has had massive discussion, but it's something that, well, we're going to find out because Louisiana Tech is so dang good at it.
Yep. Any thoughts, Johnny, before we move on to what this, I guess, new look FIU defense is?
Yeah, before that, I mean, Smoke, it's going to be an interesting one. I'm not, obviously, I don't know. I think it's going to be one of these games where I think he'll make a play just because it's the first game of the year. But yeah, he's going to be somebody that's going to be really, as a football fan, you like to see those guys that are explosive, but from an FIU side of things, he'll be, really, really impactful, and you really, hopefully, you can stop him as much as you can. And he'll be used a ton tonight.
Yeah.
Already.
Before we get to the defense, I do want to mention one last thing. What do you think is going to be the biggest difference between FIU going into this Louisiana Tech game last season versus now?
I think it's going to be a lot more. It's going to be an efficient offense, a lot more efficient than what we saw last year. I think both sides of the ball are going to look a lot more efficient. Obviously, year one with a new coach, offense. I mean, just year one in general for a new era of FIU football. And I think this is the way that, our good buddy Eric Henry put it. It was kind of like having name tags on each player, learning each player, learning their play style, just learning everything about not only the team itself, the players, just the culture that you want to build in FIU, kind of plant the roots of what you want to have for the next couple of years. I think now having a lot more familiarity is huge, not only just for coaches, but for the players themselves, and specifically Grayson James, who's had to go through a couple of, changes throughout his career with FIU. So I think we're going to see a lot more consistency and efficiency on both sides of the ball.
By the way, I didn't want to forget, I think the biggest difference between FIU coming into this game last season versus this year, FIU's offensive line was not completely healthy when they entered that Louisiana Tech game last year around the latter end of the season.
It was really bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, for all intents and purposes, we know what the offensive line will likely look like, and it's relatively healthy. So Grayson James is going to be able to work with a completely healthy offensive line. If FIU's offensive line, I think that's going to be the biggest keep an eye on what to watch out for FIU. Just in total, it's how their offensive line is going to respond to Louisiana Tech's extremely impressive and veteran defensive line. So yeah, just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, when you look at what Grayson kind of spoke to us about it, I asked him, I was like, how big is it for you to have, 5 healthy guys on that line? Obviously, very difficult. And I've mentioned this many times. I've mentioned it on this podcast. I mentioned it on other podcasts. And, to coach himself, he mentioned it himself. It was difficult to practice last year. It was difficult for these guys just to even have a full, efficient practice. They had so many guys out, so many guys rotating in that offensive line. I believe he had true freshmen playing last year. And I guess that's where we kind of talk a little bit about Jacob Peace. He's one of the leaders of this offensive line this year. He's been great for them, in camp. He's been taking on that leadership role. And then he mentioned John Bach as one of the most improved guys. Obviously, John Bach was one of the most, one of the biggest impact players on that offensive line last season. And this season, that's someone who's improved the most in spring and fall, according to John Bach. So,
speaking of Peace, I believe we have a clip of him talking about his veteran quarterback Grayson James.
And that's what we're going to do right here. And right after this quote, we'll start talking about this defense for FIU.
What growth have you seen out of Grayson last year?
Oh, the confidence. I feel like this is like the number one thing. I think the talent has always been there, but I feel like Grayson's been more vocal, more confident. Just hanging out with the guys, being that personality, it's been great.
And there is
he makes me look tiny, dude. I'm like 6 foot. Standing next to him, I feel small.
I mean, I'm like 5'4", 5'5". That's
Alrighty, let's talk about this FIU defense. Very new look to it, just given not only new look, but as I mentioned when we were talking about just the big difference, a lot more efficient, a lot more consistent, a lot more comfortable in the year two of this 3-4 defense. Johnny, obviously, we saw departures. Gathan Bernadette gone. Javon Strickland, I believe, graduated. He did not decide to return. I believe he's in grad school, just not playing football anymore.
He's getting a PhD in I think he's
biology.
Swimming with sharks. I saw over the summer.
That's cool. He was on Shark Week, I believe.
Shark Week, yeah.
So obviously his loss, another loss there. I believe that they also lost to Demetrius Hill. That was a very
And Sean
surprise.
Peterson Jr. too. That was a
Sean
good one.
Peterson Jr. goes to UCF.
UCF, yeah.
I think the biggest surprise, I guess, was Demetrius Hill. He went through spring with the team. He spoke to the media. He sounded like he was ready to come back, make all conference team. Unfortunately, he departed to Iowa. I want to say
Illinois.
Illinois, yes, Illinois. And let's talk a little bit about the additions. Obviously, this team made, and I'm a big fan of a lot of them. Let's start with the Bryant transfer. Jack Daly. He fits this scheme as best. It fits in like a glove. I think we could kind of say that he fits perfectly. You put him at the nose guard, lining up with the center. This guy's huge. Like when you see this guy in person, he is a big guy, and that's something that we did not have with Javon Strickland last year. I believe Javon was that nose guard 0, whatever you want to call it. He was in the middle, lining up with the center. Johnny, how big is it for FIU to have that guy who not only knows the 3-4 defense well, which was one of the reasons why he ended up deciding to come to FIU, but someone as big and strong as Mr. Jack Daly?
I mean, it helps that we saw him play last year against Bryant. That's another big thing why, FIU took a look at him. You talked about it. He's a huge guy. He's somebody that he's your typical D-line guy. He's somebody that can hold the line in the fourth down. And this is part of a defensive line that's a little bit, it's on the younger side of things, obviously. Jordan Garrod is another name as well, who I think is going to have a big year. Steven Shannon, son of Randy Shannon, who obviously was former head coach of Miami Hurricanes, and I think now with FSU. But this is a young D-line, and Jack Daly kind of spearheads it a little bit just based on what he's been able to bring to the table. Oh, Jeremy Passmore. That's another Jeremy Passmore, too. He's a big one as well on the other side from Indiana. Second year with FIU. Those two, Passmore and Jack Daly, are huge additions and huge keys, and they'll be huge for the line, a line that I think is going to really make some improvements and needs to, just because of all, the history with FIU and, having a little bit more issue to stop the run. I think this year you'll see some changes with that, and I think that this is a line that I think as the season goes on, it's going to be really, really good.
Anything else you want to add there, Jake?
No, I mean, if FIU's defensive line, as we mentioned earlier, Louisiana Tech's going to be coming out there with inexperienced and questionable running backs. I feel like that's one of those certain things we can say about Louisiana Tech. Well,
really?
I mean, you
Jarvis Thornton.
You lose the big weapon you had, okay?
Yes, but you still have Jarvis Thornton, and he was someone that we both you were there. Coach Mack emphasized how big of an impact Jarvis Thornton made to that team last year, and I believe that's the guy they're going to be relying on in the run game. He made an impact against FIU. I believe it was 53 yards for 1 touchdown, 12 attempts.
Yeah.
Obviously, not as much playing time given the fact that you had Mark Crosby there, but
true. That is true. But let me emphasize something. When you lose a big name running back, you also lose the play calls that worked best with him. So Louisiana Tech is going to pretty much have to switch out the playbook for something brand new in order to figure out who's going to be their go-to running back in this game. And the job for FIU's defensive line is to sort of call them out on that. FIU's defensive line better have done some homework on Louisiana Tech's depth in that position, because the number one guy they had is not there anymore. So now they're going to have to figure out who's going to be Louisiana Tech's running back number 2 or 3, or if they're going to run a dual threat system, because they absolutely could. I think they absolutely could. So that is no tough task for FIU.
I guess on the same note with the running backs, and obviously it gets a little worse. Tyrese Shelton, who is on the depth chart that the Bulldogs released on Twitter. Yeah, that's the public depth chart. That he is a game time decision for the Bulldogs. So they would probably be looking to, I think Miami transfer. Well, he is the Miami transfer. I'm sorry. He was a Miami transfer from last season coming into this year. It's got to rely on a couple guys there. So, let's see how that goes. But Johnny, just staying on the defensive line, obviously, you mentioned some big name guys. Can we say this is like one of those underrated positions that's just not being spoken about enough? Because obviously, when I personally think about this defense, I'm looking at the linebacker core that is stacked.
Yeah, I would say that the D line and the linebackers are the positions that I feel good about. I think with the D line, you're still a little bit I think based on the playing time, you want to see more of that. But I think that, as I said, as the season progresses, I think they'll get better. And then you kind of hit on the linebackers. That's the big one that I'm excited to watch. We talk about Dom Emmanuel. He's the man. He's the captain, really, the defense. The linebacker had over 100 tackles last year. He was 100. It was around that number, if I'm correct. But he was really, really good to watch alongside Gaithan Bernadette, who went over to Stanford. And then you bring in Reggie Peterson, who's had a cool ascension of being a walk-on, getting the scholarship, and then the past 2 years has been more of the linebacker leader that we've seen. And then even, guys like Elijah Anderson Taylor, Kyle Wright, he's never a big one addition. You'll talk, you guys, about Kyle Wright, who from Georgia Tech comes in, didn't play a whole lot last year, but Coach Mack emphasized he got really bigger. I think he added about 20 pounds, if I'm correct, 25 pounds.
I'll have to look back, but yeah, I think it's
off season, and there's a reason why he'll be a big reason for this team this year. So I'm excited to watch the linebacker core, mainly for this FIU defense.
I guess, and not to bring the mood down a little bit, but there's one core that I'm a little bit worried about. It's the defensive backs and the safeties. There's so much question on that position. Obviously, you lose a guy like Demetrius Hill, Dorian Hall no longer there. Those were the two safeties, I believe. Obviously, you look at that that side of the ball. You have Hezekiah Masses, you have Adrian Cole. Those guys who made big steps in their development, from one year to another. And then you also have Deverick Daniel. He's a junior, obviously. Ladarian Polk, who you added from the transfer portal, junior. Jamal Potts, who's been here with the team. And then you have CJ Christian, who's coming back from a torn labrum. Correct me if I'm wrong, Johnny. So, Jake, when you look at that position, obviously, if there's one thing that's very positive about it is you bring in not only Miami legend, but you also bring in an NFL experience in DeMarcus Van Dyke. So just your thoughts on that position.
Boy, can we talk about how good Demetrius Hill was in last season's game?
He was
against Louisiana Tech. 11 tackles and 2 forced fumbles. That is absolutely ridiculous. And would it also be crazy to say that I think that was the FIU defense's best game last season? I know giving up 34 points is crazy, but they still made the stop in overtime. And throughout the course of the game, they really did limit Louisiana Tech from doing what they do best for the most of that game. I'll say most. So yeah, to see a player like Hill gone, it hurts, especially when you begin the season against Louisiana Tech. He has a great history. It was one game, but I felt like he would have been a player that Louisiana Tech would have had to have studied from their last game and learn. And now they don't really have to do it. They really have to look at FIU's depth chart whenever that officially comes out and see what the Panthers have cooking there. But I think overall defensively, FIU is going to have their work out for them. But again, they're going to be seeing I would say a playbook that doesn't really match what Louisiana Tech's playbook looked like last season. They're gonna see some familiar faces on the running back and receiving cores, but as far as what the offensive coordinator for Louisiana Tech is going to throw out, it's probably going to look completely different from last year. So lots of questions. I feel like on both sides of the ball that statement holds up true. And again, it's crazy to put up a preview for a week 0 game because we really have not seen enough from both sides of the ball in these summer camps to really paint the picture as clear as possible. But yeah.
Alrighty, so we're coming down to the wire. We're getting close to finishing the pregame show here for us and give you guys some time to, get your popcorn, get your beers for 21 plus.
The Sunblazer Golden Ales, right?
The Sunblazer Golden Ale. Get your FIU gear on and sit on the couch and watch and turn on the CBS Sports Network. So we're gonna come down to, I guess, what we're gonna do every pregame. And I'm not a big predictions guy, but
Fish on First though has helped you a lot.
Fish on First has helped, yeah. So we're gonna do kind of something similar to that, what they do over there or what I do over there, and we're gonna do this. We're gonna say who wins. I'm not gonna say a score. We're just gonna go by how many touchdowns or if you think it's gonna be by a touchdown, 2 touchdowns, even a field goal, you can mention that. So we'll talk about that, and then obviously just an MVP of the game. It could be on either side of the ball. So
okay,
all right. So let's do this. We'll start with Mr. Jake Gibson.
Yeah.
And you could take, and just to clarify, just so we could get as close as the hour mark as we can, you could give a 1 to 2 minute explanation on why you're making the pick and how you think the game will go.
Okay. So It's funny. I asked Grayson James this in the press conference yesterday about how he thought offensively both teams would look. He said both offenses were great. He feels confident in what his offense is capable of doing, and he knows that Louisiana Tech is going to look good. I thought about this, whether it would be another high-scoring, high-octane offense for both sides of the ball that's going to put up a lot of points between FIU and Louisiana Tech. And honestly, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think this is actually going to be more of a low-scoring game. I think it's going to consist of Grayson James and the FIU offense sort of as the game goes along, sort of figuring out who's going to be their top receiver and their top back. And same thing goes for Louisiana Tech. However, I think Louisiana Tech has a bit more questions answered offensively, at least at this point, compared to FIU. But at the same time, I feel like both defenses are going to come out swinging way more than the offenses. So I'm going to say a low-scoring game. And I know we're technically not supposed to be giving out scores, but
if you want, I don't really care.
I don't want to be the negative Nancy here, but I got Louisiana Tech in this one. I think it's going to be like a final score of Louisiana Tech 20, FIU 17. I think that if I had to give out an MVP, it's going to be difficult, but I guess I'll go with Louisiana Tech's quarterback, the Boise transfer. I think he's just going to get it done late in the game when it matters, and then Louisiana Tech's just going to put up a field goal with a few minutes left and do it there. And not to rain on the parade of anyone watching who thinks that it's going to be a sure thing that FIU wins. I don't think so. But yeah, so final score, Louisiana Tech 20, FIU 17. Just my opinion. Don't hold me on that.
All right, Johnny, you're up.
So I'm going FIU. I'm the homer. I honestly, I really believe that we'll win this one. I think it's going to be a shootout. I think these two teams are going to battle it out. We saw what happened last year. I think that's going to be the same case with these two sides. I think FIU will take a little advantage of the running back, limitations for La Tech, but they have some depth there. But I think this is going to be a shootout. I say FIU is going to win by a field goal. I think it's going to get down to the wire. I think it's going to set the tone for this team. If FIU is able to win this game, as I said, chance to go 2-0 after this one against Maine, and then you look down the stretch, you can really have a chance to get yourself in good position to get a bowl game, even with 2 games left of the year. That's how much I think this game matters for this team. And with that, I think also that propels FIU to have a chance for Mr. Grayson James to be the MVP. I think that he's going to have another outstanding game against this Bulldog team. I think he'll find the ball to a lot of the guys. And I'll say this, I think Dean Patterson, Mr. Vice, gets his first touchdown of his career. I'm going with that as well. So Grayson James, my MVP, FIU wins by a field goal.
All righty, and I will wrap it up for y'all here. All righty. So I think FIU does end up winning this game. I'm kind of I'm in the middle with Johnny and Jake in terms of you kind of feel like they could win. It could be like one of those shootout games, and at the same time, you think it could be kind of a low scoring game. But I will go FIU wins it, and I think they'll win it by a field goal. I think, we mentioned it. These two teams match up extremely, extremely well. So I'll go with that, and I will say the MVP. I'll go with Mr. Vice as the MVP. I'm going to go Dean Patterson taking MVP honors here. It's only right. So
very respectable.
We have just a little over a minute left. Gianni, Jake, any last words for the fans that are watching and getting that popcorn ready?
Man, support the Panthers. It's going to be an awesome season, and it starts here. Getting those eyes glued to the screen for a nationally televised game. It usually doesn't come around that often for FIU, and the fact that one of the first games that fans across the country will see is none other than FIU and Louisiana Tech. I think it's going to be a great game. Of course, we're all rooting for FIU, but I think this is anyone's game.
All righty. So from Johnny, Jake, myself, we will see you guys all in 1 week for the week 1 preview. Peace out, and as we always,